Hello and welcome to our panel VR in Journalism. I'm Daniela Schulz, I'm the host of this panel, and my first question to you all would be, who is already producing something in VR in the room? Yay! Okay, welcome VR guys. I can tell a little about my panel here because as we are later on going to talk about democratizing, they democratized their own panel and they will present themselves. It's Linda Rath-Wiggins, co-founder of CEO Vragments, Ole Krogsgaard from Euronews, and Gayatri Parameswaran from Nowhere Media. So go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. So my name is Linda Rath-Wiggins. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vragments. We call ourselves nowadays XR company and not VR company because the X actually stands for any reality. We believe that in the future there will be no real distinction between virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality, but it will just all be some form of reality that we will, as users, be able to view, to experience. And the only thing that all these forms have in common is that they are immersive. It's an immersive medium. That means the users, the viewers, are always able to look around. Some people say that they are the directors of their own experiences, and there are no screens anymore, so you're not depending on this laptop screen or just the cell phone screen. You are looking around and it's a spherical experience, so it's immersive. There are no frames, and as a producer you can't really focus on a specific object anymore because you're looking at, again, a sphere. So the focus when it comes to immersive media is the perspective of the user. Who's the user within a story? And that's what we're, as Vragments, focusing on. So now we're not talking any longer about storytelling, but we're talking about story living because the viewers are inside. So this is what we've been doing for the past 3.5, 4 years. This is our team, our co-founding team. We're 5 people, and then depending on different projects, we work with 3D artists and UX designers. And what we found is that when we talk about immersive media, or XR, so we are, Marcus and we come from a journalistic background. I used to work for Deutsche Welle, which is Germany's international broadcaster. And then Ronnie, Tino, and Stefan sits over there. They come from a programmer's perspective, engineering. And what we've learned is that we need all of these experiences to actually produce something in VR or AR right now. We still need all of the different skills. So for example, we created this one VR experience about Stasi interrogation methods. So the former Eastern German intelligence service, we learned more as a user how they were interrogating the people in East Germany. And what we've learned is that it's a completely different thing whether you just listen to an interrogation or you're actually inside an interrogation room experiencing what it must have been like to be there. Another project that we were working on is an AR project that was all about data visualization on top of the Berlin real model. And what I'm trying to get at is, with all these different projects that we're working on, we still need engineers and journalists, because it's not enough to just have journalists, but they don't know how to distribute and produce these projects. And on the other hand, it's not enough to just have programmers working on these stories, because you still need a story. And a lot of the story anchors are pretty much the same with traditional media, and we can talk about that later. One more aspect that I want to focus on is we're a tech company also, so we're producing, or we're building a platform called Fader, and it's a web-based tool for journalists and content creators in general, and they can create interactive 360 stories very easily and fast. It's a web-based tool built on top of A-Frame, so that means you don't have to install anything, you don't have to download anything. All you need is a 360 camera, take videos and photos, and then you just upload it onto Fader. The website is called getfader.com. And you can put them in different scenes and add some interactive hotspots, and then you can click on publish, and that's it. So the idea behind it is to, like Daniela said, to democratize the medium, because we don't want just to have the big publishers or the big media organizations working on 360 or VR stories. We want everyone to be able to experiment with this medium because it's still new, and so it's important to us that even individuals with not a lot of time, not a lot of money can actually experiment with VR.
Okay, so we come to Gayatri. You may already can tell us something about how you are dependent on tech.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the for this panel, first of all. It's really nice to be here again in Perugia. So I like to call myself an immersive journalist, and I'm also co-founder of Now Here Media, which is an immersive storytelling studio that's based in Berlin. And we specialize in augmented and virtual reality experiences. Our focus, areas of focus really is social impact. So while we do journalism and documentaries, one of the important things that we keep in mind always is how is this story going to achieve a larger goal. And we found out that for doing that, it's actually really important to have multiple partnerships, not only the interdisciplinary teams that Linda spoke about, but to have multiple partnerships on many different levels. So journalistic partners, media partners, tech partners, as well as sometimes nonprofits and NGOs. I remember when I was young, my grandmother would tell me stories when I was going to bed. And some of these stories I still remember, even though I haven't heard them in 25 years, 35 years. And I think all of us have some of these stories that we take with us for, forever sometimes. And at Now Here, and I really do believe that stories have the power to transform and leave a really lasting impact. And I discovered about 3 to 4 years ago that immersive technologies, especially virtual reality, really has the power to take your audiences somewhere else. So as a journalist and as a storyteller, I'm fascinated by the situations in which I can put my audiences or where my audiences choose to go together with me on a journey. We focus on, as I said, social impact, and within that, human rights is a core area for us, as well as gender equality, gender justice, and social justice, as well as stories about the environment. Those are some of our partners. As I mentioned earlier, we not only work with journalistic partners, but also with non-profits sometimes. And I want to give an example of how, like, one of the non-profit, like one project, maybe, one of the recent projects that we took up is Home After War. And this is a virtual reality installation as well as an experience which allows 6 degrees of freedom. So viewers can actually put the headset on and walk in a certain space, and it's an interactive experience. So some people stay in the experience or take about 20 minutes to complete the experience. Some people we've had people who stay for 40 minutes. So it's really a very subjective experience. It's a narrative that you explore yourself. This project was created as part of the Oculus VR for Good Creators Lab, which brings together journalists / filmmakers and nonprofits. And so the topic is somehow defined by the nonprofit, this kind of partnership, the partnership between the nonprofit and the filmmakers or the creators. And at the end of it, the idea is to kind of see, okay, how can we create impact with this piece, raise awareness and create impact. The piece has received good response in terms of showing at film festivals. We've been able to show it, among others, at the Venice International Film Festival as well as South by Southwest. And one very important, I mean, I am quite humble. I would love for VR to be a democratic tool, but I'm really humble in the audience that it can reach in terms of the numbers. And therefore, I think with most of our projects, what we are trying to see is to have a very defined target audience. And with this one, we really wanted to take it to the United Nations and show it to decision makers and policy makers so that that can actually have bring some kind of change on the field. The piece is from Iraq, and it focuses on the problems of improvised explosive devices or booby traps that have been left behind after the recent war with ISIS, or the fighting with ISIS has subsided. And in the piece, you are in Fallujah, and you listen to the story of a father who has lost 2 sons to an explosive accident. And with that, I think I want to leave this introduction here and see, okay, I think it's very interesting what we bring to the table so far in terms of, trying to reach a lot of people and trying to see how we can achieve impact by pointing it in a certain direction.
Let's come back later to the point why NGOs are so interested in working with VR. At least that's one of my findings. But first we hear how a broadcaster is dealing with VR.
That would be me. My name is Ole Krogsgaard. I'm immersive journalism editor at Euronews. And it's my sometimes tough job to, it's my job to Gayatri is humble about the numbers. It's a large part of my job to sit and look at the numbers and figure out how do we actually reach people with VR, because by far our biggest problems as a broadcaster is the distribution pipeline of this thing. This is our headquarters in Lyon, where Euronews is based. Euronews is an international TV channel.
Which looks like a VR goggle.
It looks exactly like a VR goggle. You can see I'm sitting in the left eye normally. We publish in 12 languages, including Arabic, Farsi, and the European main languages. We've got bureaus all over Europe, correspondents all over Europe as well. Yeah. So this is what our English language 360 webpage looks like right now. So this gives you an idea of the kind of stories we publish. The last thing we published is a delightful piece where some journalists went with a dog sled racing team that did this dog sled race, a 4-day race across the French Alps, where they traveled 300 kilometers. So that's really fun, and we do these stories that are fun, but then we also do serious stuff like child poverty in Berlin. You got landmines in Ukraine. And then the last 3 stories are all sponsored stories, because we are a private broadcaster. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can turn this into a sustainable business for us. In the beginning, we started doing 360 stories in 2016 with the help from Google's Digital News Initiative. So we were quite heavily funded from the outside. But we are not that anymore, so now we have to figure out a way to make this actually a sustainable part of the business, and that is a huge part of my job. So that leads me to these numbers. I want to share some numbers with you here. I might go into more detail with this afterwards. So we have some problems with regular, normal 360 video. Everybody agrees, if you have the headset on and you watch the amazing stories that Gayatri, for example, does in a headset, you are going to have a mind-blowing experience. But as a news organization, there's no way we can broadcast that out. What we can do And what we have been doing since we started is making the 360 videos in the hope that headset assumption, like more and more people will buy headsets and get the real experience. But until then, we were then putting them on our website, on YouTube and on Facebook, where you can distribute them. The numbers for the traditional 360 is the numbers for that specific video, which is a really interesting deep dive in Finland, where they have built, or they are in the process of digging, well, the tunnel is dug. They've dug a 450-meter deep tunnel, 5 kilometers long, where they are gonna store their highly radioactive nuclear waste. So the idea being, this is so far down in a very, very stable bedrock, so no matter what happens on top of the surface, the nuclear waste will be safe. It's a really good video, and it's a really interesting subject. But as you can see, headset, we don't have users there. Facebook, we have really, that's the average view time of it. It's really short. YouTube, we are better, on the website we are better, but as we, in our traditional strategy, have reached most of our users through Facebook, we have a bit of a problem. And our current solution to that problem, the way we've been taking 360 at Euronews, is to focus more and more on interactive 360 video. So videos where the user is actually clicking around. The thought process being that we are selling 360 video to potential clients as something that's extra engaging. Engagement is like the key phrase that we say, because you can't watch a 360 video passively. You have to drag around, you have to do something. You can't be on a second screen at the same time. So that calculus, of course, only works if users are there more than 7 seconds. So what we have been thinking a lot about recently is how can we improve the engagement time. And the solution has been, and let's see, I'll try to make this a bit briefer and we can maybe return to it if you're interested in it, but the solution has been to make it interactive, because if you make it interactive, then people are in charge of when they're done in a certain scene, so any scene change can be initiated by the user and not by a journalist, or not by our decision, so we put more control out to people. And second, it's fun. Basically, it's fun. It's more fun. That's the number there, 8 minutes and 20 seconds is an average of all the interactive stories we've done. So you can see that if you just compare the two numbers from Euronews.com, you can see that people are spending twice as long in the interactive stories. But that's actually not a completely fair comparison, because the numbers we have on the interactive stories are from the player that we use, which is Fader. I'm not gonna, the player Laperite. So it's actually longer, because in the traditional 360 article, you'll also have people who are reading the text, the article text. Okay, I'll just want to show, this should be a video. Is it a video? No, that one there. No, that's a link. It's not. Yeah, I don't want you to click that. I want you to tell me if that's a video.
It's not.
Okay, that used to be a video. It doesn't matter. It's a short video we did. We won a prize on Monday in Vienna for our interactive 360 approach, and we've done a little presentation video which kind of synthesizes the points. But it doesn't matter. It says what I say, but with a beautiful British accent, so it sounds more convincing.
Okay, if I'm gonna have fun with interactive news, am I then really in trouble? Because news and fun, I'm not quite sure if this is the point. As we are in journalism, my bosses at Deutsche Welle, we are doing some things, but they really ask me very often, well, that's no news, and that's a fiction. So maybe there's a volunteer of this panel talking about fictionalization and gamification of news. Is this ethical? Gayatri, is it?
I think it's a tool to be able to make content interesting. I mean, I don't think anyone in this room will doubt that The Guardian is one of the most serious, journalism outfits that we have today, and a lot of the VR experiences that The Guardian produced have been fictionalized content. So I don't think that, I don't even know if that is a discussion we need to get into in terms of the ethics of that, because if your research is thorough and if you have your facts right, but because of the limitations of a medium, you're recreating something, I don't think that questions if something is journalism. For instance, if you're producing a flat 2D historical documentary, you might recreate some scenes that are from the past. That doesn't mean it's not journalism. So I think this is just about using the medium in a way to overcome the limitations of that medium. Gamification is the same thing. If you're allowing users to actually engage with the content, you're allowing users to play a role that increases empathy, or that takes them to another part of the world and that actually helps them live another reality, I don't see how that can't be ethical.
Okay, no. But
I think it's a very, very old-fashioned question that can only come from a public broadcaster with a lot of money. Of course you can do it in an unethical way, but I don't see any problem in trying to make news interesting and engaging through well, funny, but like, I mean, the next thing we're publishing is, see, we didn't call it a quiz because we do have ethical concerns about it, but we did what do you know about landmines in Ukraine? So where there are right and wrong choices. And as long as you come away from this experience having a better understanding of the flight of Ukrainians and the landmines they face, then I'm all for it.
I'm just sticking to it because Linda mentioned there is no frames. And I stick on, if there is so many perspectives, whose perspective is in the 360 video you'd done? I mean, you, for example, Gayatri, as a journalist, how can you put you as a journalist inside a thing which is depending so much on the user's perspective?
You have, I mean, I guess you need to also distance yourself from being in the frame, as Linda said. And I'm a little bit not sure about like this. Of course, there is no frame in 360 videos, but by putting a camera somewhere, you define where the person is going to be. So even though in traditional videos the frame was this frame, I think in 360 that becomes a kind of a stage, let's call it. So it's not a complete elimination of perspective. I still choose where to put the camera. I would still choose where to place the camera and which perspective. Do I put it higher up or do I put it lower down? And with that you influence the user's journey. I think in more complex kind of, you know, where you develop computer-generated environments and interaction and free movement with 6 degrees of freedom, I think that becomes a little bit more tricky because you're actually allowing the user to have way more agency. Something that a lot of, you know, people coming from a film background or a journalism background are not very comfortable with, because you want to tell people what to look at, what to listen to, what to read, and that can be really challenging. And that's sometimes, I think it's good to have, to be challenged in this perspective.
As a producer, so as an editor, you have much more concerns maybe how to choose what is a good immersive content, what is a good immersive journalist, what is a good immersive story for Euronews?
Yeah, of course that is, that can be difficult. I mean, the trick for us is definitely like, people ask whether there are specific topics that are good for 360. I'm always, no, like it's a medium, it's not a genre. So it's not like if you talk about like this is always great in war, or this is always great with animals, though it can be both things. But for me it's all like if the story is, I have 2 ways of deciding it. One is story-wise, whether the surroundings, whether the space that this story happens in is part of the story, a significant part of the story. It has to be a significant part of the story, otherwise it often would make much more sense to tell it in a normal framed video where you have a lot of other tools you can use, like zooming in, that are really good for storytelling. The other is that if there might be stories where this camera technology gives us something that you can't have with a normal 2D camera, as for example, well, let's take animals, because it is really good with animals and everybody loves animals. You can put a 360 camera up close to animals, even though like you don't know where the animal is going to be, and you don't want to scare the animal away by standing with a camera close to the animal, so you can just put your 360 camera and then you can back off and you'll still have the footage. Yeah, that's an example. Another example that I like to use is, it relates to the democratizing aspect you were in on, but it can be really good for stories where you want people to be able to see the whole scene, because the whole scene is more honest. My favorite example is Saddam Hussein, when they tore down his statue after in Baghdad in 2003. We saw a lot of news images in the media where you just saw a sharply framed image of what seemed to be a big group of Iraqi citizens who were tearing down the statue. And it was only a year later that we found out that it was actually a small group of citizens who did that, but that it had been filmed in a way to make it seem very big. So if there had been a 360 camera there on that scene, we could have debunked this narrative much faster. So I try as often as possible to get 360 cameras into demonstrations or like places where things like that could happen.
I just want to support your point when you say that VR is not just a new genre, it's actually a new medium. And in general, of course, it makes sense to think about why am I shooting something in 360 and not in as a 2D flat video. But one thing that I want everyone to encourage is to stop asking that question and just go for it, to be honest, because we're still at an early stage in VR and in 360. Again, the idea of democratization and giving access to everyone to this medium. Maybe we should, as an opinion, maybe we should stop thinking about does it make sense and just try it out and give that to the user and see how they perceive it. And maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. I think we're all finding that out right now. You're checking at the numbers, what's the engagement like. And so it's a trial and error phase right now, which is beautiful because we all get to experiment with it.
Trying out in broadcasters is really different. You get to know cool guys in your producer's company to have time and space to try out. But maybe that's a good point. It's not only 360, of course. It can be VR. It can be totally CGI, computer-generated images. And that's always a big thing, at least in my home broadcaster. Oh my God, that's really costly. And I now tend to tell my bosses, oh, well, if you are going to buy a car, do you buy a VW Up or do you buy a Maserati? Because there is Hollywood production and there is your own dad with his own film camera. And Linda, and you have a tool where everybody can do VR, CGI. Let's tell a little about that.
So the tool is called XR-Doc. We had a little prototyping session yesterday. We just started in October, and the idea is similar to Fader. Again, democratization of the medium. We want everyone to be able to experiment with not only 360, but actual VR with computer-generated images, with 3D models. So, and again, it's all about not asking too many questions, but just trying it out. But I do agree that as a broadcaster, I'm sure you can't just go out and try things because you have to legitimize it to...
Yes, but what is a good point is if there is, for example, a democratized tool, I could do a wrap-up, a prototype myself, and show that to my bosses.
Right.
Because a CGI is always, it's a story, and then you can do it in a very low quality thing where you can see the edges and you can see the modeling. But in the end, of course, you can do something in photogrammetry. That's always possible. You always can buy a Maserati if you want to.
Yeah.
And I think there is a space for both. To be honest, like public broadcasters spend money on video journalists producing videos from, around the world, as well as on documentaries that are produced over many years and cost hundreds of thousands of euros and dollars. So I think there is a space for both.
Of course.
As exactly as you said, you know, you can. It's a range in which you can, if you're looking at buying a car, you can really spend in a range. So it really depends on the purpose. I always say that for me, virtual reality works really well when it's not news, because it allows people to, I mean, I guess for demonstrations and stuff like that, it's actually really powerful. But for me, it really works well when it goes into long-form journalism and getting some time to work on the story, because the quality is much better. But I can see that as technology gets better and better and easier and faster to use, especially these cameras are so handy that it can get.
And they're only $90.
Yeah, and
we're not getting paid
output,
for this.
So
but yeah.
Yeah. So it really depends. Like, I think news organizations can also have a very clear strategy on, okay, if this is our annual budget, how much of it are we going to spend on these reports, and how much are we going to spend on, and if it even makes sense to do bigger productions.
But of course you can produce a Maserati, but from my desk, I mean, we can't distribute it. That's the fundamental problem that we've had. Euronews is probably the European media that has published most 360 media, so videos. So we've thought about this for a long time. As I said before, in the beginning, we thought that, okay, people would get headsets, so it was fine. We could build up our skill set while distributing on YouTube and Facebook. We'd get better, and at one point, there would be a market for it. The market is not there for a Maserati. I'm not building any Maseratis because it would make absolutely no financial sense. Instead, we are. No, I lost my train there. No Maseratis, though.
No Maseratis. Linda,
Similar
step in something?
Yeah, a similar experience from our side. When we work with broadcasters or media organizations in general, they feel much more comfortable talking about prototypes instead of full-fledged productions. So something where you can have a comparably quick turnaround, where they can just see something for the first time and then decide whether they want to keep continuing the production or not. So it's a very similar experience.
I think where I was going before was that people often have this idea that VR is like, is VR dead? Is a normal question, because there was a very, very intense hype cycle at one point, and then it flattened out. And of course, VR is not dead, because like if you go to VR film festivals, you'll see amazing experiences. You'll have your mind blown. But VR in journalism, sometimes when I want to be facetious about it, I answer yes, but of course followed by a but. So it is dead in the sense that I can't distribute great things that people will watch in a headset. But what we can do, and what we are doing, is creating great 360-degree interactive experiences that live in the browser and that people experience through their smartphone, through their computers. And we have the numbers that show that this is the most, as far as I know, this is the most engaging product we have, Euronews, we offer. Don't quote me on that, because I'm actually not sure. But what I can see is that if you look at our engagement rates are longer often than the video material content we put out there. So if you produce a 7-minute video, we can have people in it on average for 8-9 minutes, because they spend time looking around, exploring, and when they're done exploring, they click on the hotspot that leads them to the next scene. So, the idea for me that we are not producing for headsets anymore. We are producing for smartphones and for computers, and I think it's important because in the beginning, like, it means a change of tactics. Because in the beginning, we were producing in the language of movies, where we're more in narratives and timings and the movie language. But now we are producing in the narrative, or in the language of internet, which is about interactivity and about the user being in control. And that's quite a big shift, actually.
Okay, so VR is not dead, at least not now, but maybe you have some questions we didn't answer by now. Yes, there is a microphone coming up here. Front row.
Hello, I'm a science journalist. I want to ask you if do you have any certain dates in terms of engagement rate of 360 interactive videos?
If I have any what, sorry?
Engagement rate, I mean the audience.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, I don't have the number for, we have some problems, some Euronews specific problems doing stats because we publish in 12 languages. It's a nightmare. But for the interactive ones, that is an average. We have an average of 8 minutes and 20 seconds spent in them.
And what I've heard in the past, but these stats are 2 years old, the New York Times actually said that 8 minutes is around a normal duration of people staying in an experience. The New York Times has an app where they publish 360 stories or VR stories on a frequent basis, and they said a similar duration.
And I think apart from the duration, actually the way it affects you is quite different. So especially if you're in a headset, most people that come out of an experience, whom I have spoken to said, I was there, instead of saying, I saw that. Which means, and there is research, actually the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab did research where they said that the way a virtual reality experience gets saved in the brain is more as an experience than a memory of having seen something. So that actually brings me to also a point of like responsibility as journalists when we are putting people in certain situations within a headset or in immersive spaces. So that's just something to throw out there in the room.
It is also an ethical issue. Is that right?
Sorry?
It is also an ethical issue.
Exactly. So it becomes, I mean, medicine is using virtual reality in a lot of different ways. For instance, in pain treatment, there has been some research that shows that burn victims, when they, it's really painful to have your dressing changed when you have burns, like third-degree burns. So in hospitals, they're using, as children especially, making children wear headsets and play games, and then they do the pain treatment. And statistically, they show that the pain that the children record is 50% less. So it's really incredible in terms of, what impact it can have. So that, again, stresses the point of being really responsible when you're putting people in, difficult situations.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I know some of your work and it's super interesting to see what's happening in this field. I think personally I also wanted to share that one of the most impactful, I think, VR experiences I saw was at the vegan fair in Berlin, and they had it from a meat production farm. So I think you can also see it a lot used in advocacy, and I think it was very powerful. But I wanted to ask you, all of you actually on the panel, where would you go to still see what's happening in the scene and be inspired also by work that others are doing, and if there is like good places for me and others who are not so familiar yet with what are all the different ways to also use these media, where to go and see what's being done and what's done well as well. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a question that I also constantly have. I, of course, want to know, what are the latest VR or 360 stories. So what I personally do is I just go through the
list on Euronews.com.
There you go. Yes, Euronews, of course. I go to CNN VR, so they all have either on their websites their latest 360 productions, or if you have a headset like the Oculus Go, you can go on their home platforms or on apps. They publish everything on their apps too. So CNN VR, Al Jazeera, New York Times, BBC and Guardian, and Euronews. These are, you know, just the biggest media companies that I look at, and then
And you downloaded the UNESCO Heritage app made by
Deutsche Welle,
DW, of course.
Of course. So, and then there are a lot of news sites that are just focusing on VR. For example, Frodo, I don't know.
Within is an app that does a lot of VR. I mean, I also find it just the most cutting edge and the most advanced things that come out in VR are really at film festivals at the moment.
Yeah. Venice Film
and conferences. Festival. So there are a few in Europe. Sheffield DocFest is one. There's Venice, of course. Linda and Stefan organize a VR journalism conference and the pop-up. So those are places. I think actually going to a location and binge watching is really, for now, what I do.
Yeah.
Just going.
But you also can have a look at the Arty VR app. They are very specific right by now, because they started as everybody by doing whatever they thought would be good. And now they really have a policy. They only do it when it's really edgy and in terms of how we can go on. So they are not in plans of, we make a 360 reportage. They make things like, how would you live when you were blind? So then you really are in an immersive black room, and things change when you go near. So then you can have like spots of light, or something shivers. So that's really edgy things, and Arte is quite at the forefront by doing very specific, quite goodly thought things.
And there's a great podcast called Voices of VR, which is really cutting edge as well from the US, but it's great.
So more questions, please? Last one, I suppose.
Wir haben noch Zeit. 10 Minuten.
So, ich dachte, Viertel vor.
Nee, 5 vor.
Oh, right.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Renato. I'm a journalist from Brazil, and I specialize I actually took a master's degree on VR used for journalism in 2011.
Ooh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. It didn't went so great because at the time my professors didn't really know what, augmented reality
they didn't know.
was. But anyway, 8 years went by. I would like to ask the members of the panel here if nowadays, first, do the journalistic teams as a whole, not just the special unit specialized in VR, but as a whole, already consider VR as a viable platform for journalism? And if so, how does the creative process go about?
So if the journalists see, I feel I can talk to the process at Euronews at least. I think that's the place with the most journalists, and where our stories are generally produced by freelancers, by staff members, and we have some distribution agreements. By us, we started out introducing VR very, very broadly, so there's a lot of journalists who have had some brief training in it and who knows the basics of it, and then they basically come to me if they have an idea they want to work, and then we talk about whether that's a viable idea and how they would do it.
How long does it take from the conception of the idea to the finished product?
It really depends.
It depends. If it's the DW, I think it really depends if you're going for the VW up or the Maserati. If you want to build a Maserati, you have to do a lot of research before. You have to do a lot of mock-ups. You have to do user testings. Then you opt for a CGI, yes or no. Then you have your programmers. I mean, you can really start by, oh God, you go for 80,000 euros and you do it in a week, or you go for 500,000 and you need, I don't know, 3 years.
But it's, sorry.
Go on.
This sounds really frightening.
Yes.
Like you said, it depends. But what you could also do is, if you know there's a demonstration in your city and you want to produce something in 360 because you think it's more interesting in 360, then you take a camera like this, you conduct interviews, you try to get the feeling of the scene, and then you use Premiere or Final Cut. You can do that by yourself. You know how it works, and then you upload it either on YouTube, Facebook, or on a platform like Fader or other similar platforms, and then you just push it out. So it can be done within hours, just like a normal 2D video too. So it doesn't have to be always
I guess
big.
it's fair to look at it as a range of content as well, no? Like, you can produce something about corruption in the food industry, let's say standardizing as a news piece that can be done in 1 day, or you can think about it as an investigative story that runs for 6 months with a team that's spread across the whole continent and across teams, which is going to take much longer and cost much more money. So I guess it's hard to pin down on amount of time. I think you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, but I mean, the main problem with this, thanks. The main problem with this technology as a whole, I mean, 5 years ago, is that for starters, journalists were not aware that they could use that.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, even considering that Oculus Rift was launched 2 years prior, so it wasn't that, popularized as it now. But I don't see...
But actually, I think journalists jumped on VR very, very early on, because if you look at like the godmother of VR, Noni de la Peña, she was working with Palmer Luckey, who then went on to, the company that he founded is Oculus, and then Facebook bought Oculus. And he was kind of working in her garage, and they were making content for VR as journalists. Maybe not in a conventional journalism format, but I think journalists have been actually quite fast in adapting the medium, and at least in this wave, like since the 2000s,
But when you ask, is it viable? I would say it's still quite niche in general. I mean, we've listened to some of the numbers. They're still quite low. And I think the reason why it's niche is when you think about the production, the distribution, and the consumption, there's still at each step, there are still so many challenges. On the production side, it's all about the storytelling, what works and what doesn't work. We don't really know yet. We've tried a few things, and some things work very well, and other things we have to readapt. On the other hand, production-wise, which camera is best? I mean, this is already 4K, but when you think about a 360 sphere, it's not really crisp yet. So we have these problems. On the distribution side, the headsets, nobody is... or not a lot of people are buying the headsets. Is web VR really the answer? We don't know. And then on the consumption side, again, the numbers are still quite low. So I would say, in general, it's still quite a niche medium, but I do think that's where the future lies. If you think a little bit bigger in terms of immersive media, instead of just thinking this is VR and this is AR, I do think that there's a future, the future.
That sounds quite good. No, I think we're over by time, but...
Can you talk about a story that you had issues with when you were trying to tell it in VR and how you overcame that?
Sorry?
Can you talk about issues that you experienced when you tried to tell a story in VR and how you overcame them.
What kind of issues?
Yeah, what kind of issues have you experienced, like what that you wouldn't have experienced normally because you're using a VR platform?
Distribution is one big issue that we spoke about, and I think on a story side, of course, you have to always look at how do you tell a story. So the first question would probably be, who is the user going to be in the story? Like, from which perspective are you going to tell a story? Is it just as a neutral viewer, so the person remains themselves within the VR experience or within the VR story? Or is it going to be role-playing, as in Stasi VR, for instance, where you were someone within the piece? I think there are also, like, I must say, quite honestly, I have learned so much technically. Like, every project is such a steep learning curve to be able to understand the game engines like Unity and Unreal. I'm not saying I can function in them, but I do know what's possible and what's not possible, and that took me at least 1 to 2 years to understand, okay, and it's constantly changing as well, the possibilities. So it's about being fully updated about what's possible, what's not, and that also leads to opportunities, because sometimes you solve a problem that you think only you have solved and a problem that only you had, but actually it's a problem that a lot of people had, and it's likely that you might have a solution. So that's kind of very, very intriguing to be in that space where all of us, it's really like walking and stumbling and walking again, getting up and stumbling and waking up and saying, hey, actually we've come somewhere else today, you know?
Last question.
So this is for Euronews. You mentioned about in the beginning your stories were heavily funded, and then at some point the funding went off. So I'm just curious about the sustainability element on the model of VR journalism and how you've observed that in the period you've been working on, and whether that has also affected the kind of stories that you tell.
Yeah, good question. It is sustainable, but we would like to make more money off it, which is also why we've been trying to look very actively into this engagement rate, because that is our unique selling point. That is what I can go to an interested buyer and saying that this is the thing that will keep your audience most engaged. So that's why we've gone very heavily into that. It's doing all right. We're actually a little bit helped by the downturn in mass production, because it positions us as the kings of the one-eyed kings of the blind country. There's not that many people doing it anymore, which is really good for us. So about half of our content right now is things that we have. We sell them as part of bigger deals. So we sell. Typically, we have sponsors that buy a TV package, and then on top of that, they also buy 6 360 stories. So that's our model. It works decently, but we are still looking to improve it. And I want to take the chance to mention, because I think we haven't had the chance to hype Fader enough. I don't want to, the product that Linda has built might not be the only web VR platform out there, but it is a really effective platform to tell interactive 360 stories, and we have personally, at Euronews, we are betting on that as at least the immediate future of VR. So if you're thinking about doing a 360 story, but you don't think you can get people into physical headsets, then I would strongly encourage you to try and play around in web VR editors such as Fader.
And I would, just as the last words, I would encourage you to, not to stop it, but think on VR as a modular tube. It's not a single story. Single stories are very fast and sold, and maybe the market once will be fed. But if you think in modules as modular stories, as in the normal TV, if you think your story to be a series and on modules, you will get along. That's my vision for the future. Many VR people, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thank you.